which is which is a huge undertaking. So the catchment facilitators have to have the ability to actually be able to have a good overview of the catchment, what the catchment is wanting to achieve, and ensure that each individual farm plans hits its target to collectively get to the outcome. So the way that I see their sort of job description is to answer questions about the process and the system, to give one-on-one advice to landowners, give land management advice, to understand the catchment context, vision and challenge in detail, and to be able to communicate that to individual landowners, farm consultants, certifiers, community, catchment groups, to coordinate support and information and technical advice for groups and landowners from council. So just a little note there is, I had a sort of little stock take within our own division within council, and there's I know that there's 23 different projects that are working with landowners in any one catchment at any one time. So that is, for an individual landowner within the catchment, that is 23 different people at council that have to deal with, which is just simply too much. So the whole idea is that the catchment facilitator knows what's going on with council and is the conduit between all those different people at council and the catchment and the landowner within that catchment. For the Takaka and Waimea catchment, we also have to create and implement action plans according to the freshwater legislation, because we've got degrading water quality problems there. So it's a huge undertaking. The other thing that is really important here, before I forget, is to establish collective approaches for the development and actioning of those freshwater farm plans. The last thing I want is that each individual landowner of those 1,700 landowners has to run to a consultant and spend money on getting a farm plan done, because they're about $5,000 each. And I really don't want that to happen. So what I would really like those facilitators to do is to come up with approaches to work with either different catchment groups or the industries that support the different land users to have their own freshwater farm plan programs, so that landowners have got the empowerment to do it themselves and don't have to go and pay a consultant. That's sort of, I'm quite passionate about that part of the work. There is, within the freshwater farm plan process, there's an obligation from council to appoint the certifiers and the auditors that will certify and audit the farm plans. So I also see those catchment facilitators will have to train the certifiers and the auditors on what is actually catchment context, what is the objectives and the outcome of the catchment, and to actually have a look at some of their work. So to pretty much audit the auditors or audit the certifiers, to have a bit of a snapshot of what they're doing, to make sure that we get farm plans that deliver quality and not just tick a box. And then sort of going on from sort of 2024 onwards, the freshwater farm plans are going to start integrating into integrated farm plans. So there are things like the biodiversity module will be added to the farm plans, and the emissions mitigation and calculations module, as well as Mataranga Māori module and Mahinga Kai module. So, but I guess we have to start with catchment context first and then build onto that. So I think that's all I say before I overwhelm everybody, but questions, please.
Yep, thanks, Mirka. If you can just unshare your screen. Susan and Esther, do you want to say anything about the new staff? It's all too new.
We have nothing to share at the moment, because we have only just starting to develop the laws. We don't know what we're on at this point.
Yep, excellent. Are there any questions on for people who wrote material on their projects that anybody wants to ask? Like, I have one for Jude. Jude, with your funding, you talk about that you're able to provide water quality monitoring for catchments. Have you got a budget for paid water quality samples, or are you intending to do that with SHMAC measurements?
Well, it's part of the budget and forecast but it's got to identify where the needs are first, and that's why we're at the research stage, meeting with everyone, with all the iwi, with all of you, and working out targeted sites. And then form a collaborative plan with a budget alongside it. Do I need it? Yeah, I've got it. So we're not jumping the gun in anything, and our research stage will probably go right till February until we identify the sites that are needed to be worked upon and put the budget to those sites.
Right. Got a question, Mirka? Cool, thanks. Thanks, Mirka, for the detail. Is it correct then that the catchment enhancement officers or facilitators or whatever they're called, is this largely focused on freshwater farm planning with farmers, or is their role broader and will they work with like community groups and others?
I think the role is broader. It is just that it is it's the freshwater farm plan that the farmers have to do is kind of what how do I word it? So the catchment facilitator has to work with community groups. I call them catchment players. So anybody that plays within the catchment, the iwi, the community groups, the individual landowners, the catchment facilitator has to be able to understand what it is that the catchment players are trying to achieve in the catchment and be able to help the individual landowners address those issues in their individual farm plans, because the farm plans are the tool to deliver catchment outcomes. But to deliver catchment outcomes, the facilitator has to work with all the different catchment players. I hope that makes sense.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, it's Deb's here. And thanks, Mirka. Thanks for putting that up. I think it's really interesting. I see Davine's had some questions on there too. But my question is around the, you know, when you're talking about setting outcomes, are the outcomes driven around the water quality of the river? Like what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? Just as kind of picking up from what Davine's saying, but recognizing that there's a broad, you know, there's obviously statutory responsibilities, there's communities' responsibilities, there's landowners, there's forestry, there's public conservation land, and then the water is also flowing out into Tasman Bay where you've got marine farming. So it's quite a broad context around what the outcomes are. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. It is hugely broad, and that is one of the problems, because I think that what we are encountering is that we have to have the process in plan by the end of the process is already set, but we have to start delivering farm plans by the end of 2024, which is only 2 years. So, and to start having that discussion with community over what the outcome, what is the vision of the catchment, will take more than 2 years. But what the freshwater farm plan set out to do first is to actually identify what is the inherent risk of the landscape. And then on top of that, what is the risk of the land use within that landscape? And what is the risk of the individual action of the individual land owner within the land use within the catchment? And we can address that without having, you know, even without knowing exactly, I mean, we know we want to improve water quality, for example, even without having to set limit, we can identify those 3 risks, and we can start putting actions and mitigations into a plan. But the plans will be, they are not a set plan, and then that's the end of it. Plans are reviewed as a minimum every 5 years, probably every year to 3 years to start with. So we will have to add catchment context as the plans are being edited, or as the plans evolve along the way. But first off, it's risk assessment.
Yes, you talked about farm plans. Well, as farmers, we've had environment plans for quite a few years now, but you know, you're including lifestyle block people now into this, and is this as well as the present environmental plans that we have?
Was that a question for me? or
Yeah, there was a
that-
question, and it was about lifestyles. If the property is an animal farm and it's less than 20 hectares, they don't need a farm environmental plan by law. Certainly in the catchments, I encourage people, if they wish on those blocks, to do a farm environment plan. I think it's less than 5 hectares for a horticultural block. So
Yeah.
from the legislation point of view, they don't need them. But I think you'll find our experience in the Motheri is quite a few people, you know, that that particular catchment is 75% lifestylers. And we're going to hit somewhere around 350,000 trees planted in there by lifestylers. So they're keen to come along on the journey too, but it's all voluntary. I just, because I've got a captive audience, I just want to make a comment about one of my projects. I just want everybody to be aware that we now have 100,000 trees that are going to be available with a $1.50 subsidy in Nelson, Tasman, hopefully mainly through catchment groups. So it's a really good incentive to start some new catchment groups. I'd hate not to use them all. And hopefully if we do it well, this is overseas funding, which is even better. If we do it well, we'll get that for another 2 years. So it's available for community groups, iwi groups, catchment groups, project mahua, so things like that that are set up.
And that we always get a lot of, or I do get a lot of inquiries from individual landowners straight to council about subsidised plants. Can I just send them straight to you?
I'm going to set up a survey, and you can send them the survey link so that they can register. I don't want lots of individual people contacting it. I want it all collated using the same system that Elliot uses in the Motheri to handle large amounts of trees for lots of people.
Sounds good.
Right, so what I want you to do